Hey, WCA, Mike Amori. How's everybody doing? Week 7 already. Where did the time go? Winter 2019. We only have one class left. Take a look at this game that I want to show you here from the London system. I think everybody in the class has seen this by now. It's become so popular for the players with the white pieces. Normally, when you see d4, d5, you'll see a lot of players with white play the Queen's Gambit. And the main line, or at least one of the main lines, goes pawn to e6, which locks in the bishop up here. However, it has the idea of playing this c5 move pretty early, or getting yourself castled quickly. You see how pawn e6 opens up the dark squared bishop? So, for example, one of the main lines goes knight c3, knight f6, bishop to g5. So all of these moves are based around this central pawn d5. You see how the c4 pawn is attacking it, the knight is attacking it, and if you flip to this side, you'll see that the black knight is protecting d5. So what does white do? They put a bishop on g5 and put pressure on the knight, which again puts pressure on d5. So in the Queen's Gambit declined, after bishop e7, you can see that after 4 moves, black is already set to castle. White plays e3. Notice the dark squared bishop is outside the pawn chain. It starts on c1, but in this position, it develops, and then white plays e3. Let's say you castle, knight f3, h6, and then, they don't usually give up the bishop for the knight yet, although they certainly could, and they'll play a move like bishop h4. You see the pawn structure, the basic idea? I'm going to come back to this in a second, because the game we're looking at is d4, d5, bishop f4, the London system. So what white is going to do is they're going to play the move e3 at some point, and then the bishop will be outside the pawn chain, just like I showed you, but there are some minor differences. When we get there, I promise to point them out. Black in this game, who is a strong master, played pawn e6. And when you see an early e6, you see how it locks in the light squared bishop? I think their idea is similar. What they're going to do is get castled quickly and then figure out how to get this bishop into the game. Either wait for an exchange or perhaps fianchetto the bishop. Okay, knight f3, knight f6, pawn e3, bishop e7. So you see after those 4 moves, let me take you to the Queen's Gambit decline. You see how similar that is? So here's move 4 after our game. Look at the black pieces. And over here, they hardly move. You see that? Because black wants to play a familiar structure. Okay, so this is the game we're looking at. Knight b to d2. The reason not c3, white is going to use this c-pawn here to either protect the center or break with c4. So black breaks first, and then you see the pawn come to c3, completing what's known as the London pyramid. So white is keeping a solid grip on the d4 square. Castle, white to play. Let's develop this bishop. Where and why? Well, why not take the bishop and point it at the king? Knight b to d7. This is where I'm showing you this game later in the session. I wouldn't show you this at the beginning because at the 12 o'clock and 2 o'clock classes, occasionally we have students that play pawn moves on the side of the board without completely or fully knowing their opening ideas. In this position, and I did wait until the end of the session to show you this game, white plays the amazing looking pawn h4. Harry the h-pawn charging up the board. Can you imagine? Well, there's an idea behind this. And the idea is basically, well, let's look at black's side. They need to work on this bishop playing in the game. So black played b6. White has a very clear reason for playing this move h4. And it is connected to b6 because they're kind of thinking this bishop is going to be working on this diagonal at some point. So with h4, they have this very sneaky idea. Watch this. They're not going to castle. They're going to play knight e5 and keep pressure in the center. If this bishop moves away at some point, then black always has to be careful of this knight getting captured. And again, you have to be careful how you take back, because if this knight ever moves, there could be a famous bishop sacrifice here on h7. That actually happens here right away. Let's show you how. Should black take this knight in the center? People who have had this position before usually ignore that and simply continue developing the bishop, putting it here on b7. I know that looks very passive having it here, but with the pawn breaks in play, perhaps in the future black can continue to break out of this and then activate this light squared bishop, but not here. In this game, black took the knight right away, leaving us with a choice. Most London system players know that in this position to take with the, come on, Navaneeth, with the pawn. Perfect. You take with the pawn because it hits the knight on f6. Hitting the knight on f6 pretty much forces it back to d7, and it's in this position that white tried a new attacking idea. Bishop takes h7. Which on the surface looks like a really strong move, because obviously you're going to get that king to jump out and you're going to get hit with queen h5 check. That's on the surface. If you look a little deeper, the normal sacrifice is followed by a knight move coming to g5, adding pressure and threatening a checkmate up here. But this position looks very different. Why would white do this? Which piece is going to help the white queen out? It turns out that this knight on d2 can do it. Well, black has to get the king out of check, and now simply knight f3. And knight f3 has the idea of simply coming to g5 and checkmating the king on h7. Very simple. So to prevent that, black played f6. Now, at the end of this game, I'm going to come back and show a defensive idea that black missed. Here in the game, you did not prevent knight g5. It comes anyway. And don't forget, white is down a piece. What do you do here? How do you stop these checkmates? This knight is covering all the escape squares. You pretty much need to take that knight. And when you do, white takes back with Harry, the h-pawn. And now the queen is threatening to come up the board. She'll come there quickly with a move. I'm making a random move, like bishop a6. Can you see the winning move for white? I bet you can. We've talked about it a million times. Pawn g6, creating the pawn wedge on the 6th rank with power pieces behind it. That's deadly. Black's not getting out of this. Game over. So if you go back, when white took that piece off, black found the defensive move, rook f5. The idea is very simple. If you make the pawn wedge, you lose the queen. So queen h7 comes first, and where to put the king. You cannot put the king on f8, because then the queen becomes the pawn wedge. Look at that. Amazing. The queen just takes over the job as the wedge, and rook h8 is really difficult to meet. You have to give away everything you own. So that's not going to work. So after queen h7, black had to play king f7. Sound good? Now we give the check. King goes to e8, and a really nice pattern by white. And don't forget, they're down 2 minor pieces. Queen takes g7. Threats kind of coming, but the main idea is to free the g pawn to push. Bishop f8, attacking the queen. Queen goes to g8. And now there are some serious problems. This pawn coming up the board, hitting the bishop, is going to be really strong. Plus this rook coming to h7 or h8. Black decided that was too much pressure, took the pawn on e5, just to open a square for the king. You see the defensive idea? So there goes the knight. Can black take that bishop on e5 with the rook? You cannot. You have checkmate here on f7. So the king makes a run for it. Pawn push. What to do? You might as well get something for your trouble. Bishop takes. Queen takes. King went to c6. You could have blocked here with your queen, And then maybe a move like queen g6, threatening this rook coming up here would have been very, very powerful. But in the game, the king went to c6, and then after rook h8 attacking the queen, queen goes to d7, and watch, very simple, really nice attacking chess. We take the queens off. Notice there's a pin at the top of the board. The rook would hang if the bishop takes. So the king took, and then simply f4. And f4 cements this bishop at the top of the board, creating something of a pin up here. Bishop goes to b7, the only move that'll, keep the rook from being captured. Trade the rooks. Nope. First, we give a check. What do you do with your king? King to c8, and now g4. Beautiful move. Black is in big, big trouble. Rook went to f8, and now how to continue the game. You win a piece with white. Can you figure it out? Really nice. Rook c7 check. King has to go to d8. If you go to b8, you're going to walk into this discovered check, and you're going to lose everything. So the king goes to d8. Off comes the bishop. White is up a whole bishop. You have a pawn, and this bishop in the middle is an absolute killer. Black's not getting out of this. However, we're not done, my friends. I have to show you something. Really cool idea. You remember this position? When the knight was threatening to come to g5 and checkmate up here? There's a defensive move that Black missed. Can you find it? You may have to stop your video. It's really tough to see. It has something to do with a bishop. Look at that. Bishop a6. What a cool move. If the knight goes to g5, threatening mate, you simply play bishop to d3. What do you think of that move? If you don't, the bishop is going to come to that square anyway and just shut down everything that you have. Or, what to do? How do you continue your attack with white? People who have seen this defensive ideas, they say, well, we'll go to g5 anyway, or why don't we just stop the bishop from coming to d3? Well, now you play rook e8, and it looks like you're just giving up because after knight g5, there's a lot of pressure up there. However, knight f8. Beautiful defensive move. Look at this position. You're going to go, what do you mean defensive move? Queen takes f7 check. King h8. Keep this on your computer for a while or put it on a chessboard, and you'll see that Black is perfectly safe in this position. Even though the king is wide open, there's absolutely nothing White can do to continue this attack. Well, my friends, thank you very much for coming in. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you guys hopefully during the spring session.